Right.
Okay, so thank you for joining us for this interview.
Thank you for having me.
Can you briefly explain to us what the principle of universal jurisdiction is?
Put simply, universal jurisdiction enables any state to investigate and prosecute any international crime. Now, by international crime, I really mean crimes against humanity, war crimes, crime of genocide, but also the crime of piracy. Universal jurisdiction, in fact, really started with the crime of piracy. Crimes of piracy happen in international waters, and this was a way to basically give any state the possibility to take action against pirates by investigating them and prosecuting them on their own jurisdiction.
In recent years, we have seen a revival on the use of universal jurisdiction for the trial of international crimes. Could you tell us why this is the case and what is driving this trend?
I think one of the reasons is basically that these are crimes of concern to the whole of humanity, to everyone, irrespective of where one person is. And the real reason is that we're faced with really serious and atrocious crimes, and they don't leave persons unaffected. So everyone feels concerned about these crimes, and everyone wants to make sure that the perpetrators of these crimes are punished, and everyone wants to make sure that as far as they can contribute to ending impunity as far as international crimes are concerned. I think this explains the rise in the use of universal jurisdiction nowadays.
And where have we seen many of these cases happening?
So it depends what crime we're really talking about. So as I mentioned, international crimes, we're really talking about war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, but also piracy. The war crimes, international crimes and genocide charges are really being investigated and prosecuted under the concept of universal jurisdiction in European countries, I would say, so not in Africa. On the other hand, we have solid use of the concept of universal jurisdiction in Africa in the piracy trials, in the piracy cases. Countries like Kenya, Seychelles, and even Mauritius played a huge part in investigating and prosecuting and convicting a number of pirates over the recent years. So it really depends on the nature of the crimes.
So I'll divide this into two. First, we'll begin with the crimes in Africa. So this piracy cases that you've spoken about. What are some of the reasons why these states took up these cases to begin with? And what are some of the challenges that they faced, and what are the lessons learned from the process?
It's a great question. I mean, the reason the states, the African states, especially in East Africa, took upon themselves to prosecute and convict pirates was simply because piracy is one of those serious crimes. It's one of those crimes that is of concern to the whole of humanity. The devastating effects of piracy are not unknown to African states. So these states wanted to play their part in tackling these crimes and making sure that the perpetrators are behind bars and that the criminal activity is being disrupted. And also, I mean, a lot of the piracy acts were happening in the Indian Ocean. So it's not too far from where the states are. So it made sense that it was them that should really take the stand and make sure that these cases are tried. Now, some of the challenges are challenges you'd face in any complex criminal case, and especially when dealing with pirates, you have suspects, you have witnesses, and you have evidence that may be perceived as being out of reach of that particular state's, the out of reach of that state's particular jurisdiction. But so this made it was more difficult for these states to get hold of the evidence. And the way they did it was really through cooperation. So we're talking about cooperation with other states So, and cooperation with international bodies or regional bodies, cooperation with the EU, with the UN. So, and the nature of the cooperation meant that these states received help in various forms. It could have been training of investigators, training of prosecutors, training of judges. It could have been upgrading of the facilities in a particular state, the building of new courts, of specialized courts, or it could also mean that there was help in assessing the procedural laws of that particular state and seeing how they could be upgraded to make the trials, the piracy trials, for instance, more efficient. And I mean, these are a few examples of some challenges, but what's really important is that there were challenges that were overcome, and they were easily overcome for cooperation among states and among regional bodies.
Mm-hmm. And are there any lessons learned that we can then apply now from this experience?
I think the main lesson is international crimes, including piracy, might seem to be complex crimes. They might seem to be very difficult to investigate. I mean, they are, but there are ways to go ahead. There are ways to investigate these crimes. It might take more time, but there are states, there are bodies, there are people who are willing to help, and where there's a will to investigate and prosecute these crimes, there's a way. So I believe that the lesson learned is that basically all international crimes, not just piracy, can be easily investigated and prosecuted by any African state, for instance. We're all extremely competent in investigating and prosecuting these crimes. And we can do it for various ways. And the issue might be one of jurisdiction, especially if the crime occurred in another state, far away from our own. But universal jurisdiction and the concept of universal jurisdiction can help, and that can be a powerful tool that prosecutors or investigators can use in their respective domestic jurisdiction to make sure that there's no impunity for these serious crimes.
Have other African states, other than the East African nations which had the piracy cases, have they shown an interest in practicing universal jurisdiction?
I think the global stand of all African states is reflected in the statements, the public statements made by the African Union. And to summarize it, the African Union, i.e. African states, are not opposed to universal jurisdiction. On the contrary, they are in favor of universal jurisdiction because all African states understand the gravity of international crimes and they all want to end impunity. I think what African states are concerned about is really the application, the misuse or the abuse of the concept of universal jurisdiction. The African Union has advocated and is advocating for maybe the setting up of mechanisms to make sure that there's no abuse. So on the overall, I think all states are willing to apply the concept of universal jurisdiction because this is a way to end impunity for serious crimes happening in the region.
Mm-hmm. And now that we talk about the African Union, they have talked about the politicization of the concept of universal jurisdiction. What are your views on this?
I mean, the public statements made by certain African states, and which is also echoed in the statements of the AU, is really that fear that African states have that universal jurisdiction might be used by countries outside Africa to target particular individuals or particular groups of people to political ends, to geopolitical ends. I mean, some countries see this as being an attempt by Western countries to legalize a campaign against them. Now, I'm not going to comment on the veracity of it. I think the important message here is that African states are not opposed to universal jurisdiction. They're in favor of it so far that there is no abuse of that concept. I think this is the real message.
Mm-hmm. And now moving back to the example that you had given about European states having universal jurisdictions within their own territories, could you tell us what has been driving this trend? Why have we been seeing many of these cases happening? And do you expect that the trend is going to continue?
This is purely driven because these are serious crimes to everyone, not just Africans, but to all of humanity. And that's one reason why investigating judges or prosecutors in European countries would want to be seized of the situation and take action. That's one thing. Secondly, maybe they have the logistical support and the resources already at hand. And it's also important to realize that a lot of victims and a lot of witnesses from countries or regions suffering from international crimes move or seek asylum or find refuge in European nations. So these victims often form part of civil society groups, and they can then more easily reach out to European courts, and these are the jurisdictions that are easier for them to contact. And that might also be a reason why we see that universal jurisdiction is really being applied by European states as opposed to other states.
Mm-hmm. And we have been speaking to many civil society actors, lawyers, human rights defenders, journalists, and they want to know, as a civil society actor, what is my role? Is there a role that I can play in universal jurisdiction cases?
I think everyone has a role, whether you're part of a group or whether you are an individual. I think everyone has a role to play. Civil society actors are more likely to be in touch with victims and potential witnesses in international war crime cases. So they can have a better grasp of the events that unfolded. They can help in identifying key evidence, key pieces of evidence that a particular state would want to rely on when applying universal jurisdiction. And they basically represent the voice of the voiceless at times. So they have an extremely important role to play.
And lastly, we know that criminal acts are being committed, whether this be in conflict situation, transnational crimes, etc. But what are the alternatives to the exercise of universal jurisdiction? Are there ways in which some of these criminal acts can be disrupted?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about international crimes, they are serious crimes, but like any other crimes, it really depends on the evidence that you have. It might be that in particular cases, you do not have the sufficient evidence to prove charges under the various international criminal laws. But that doesn't mean that you should stop there. I think if international crimes are committed, they're often committed through other crimes, through other domestic crimes, through transnational crimes. And very often international crimes generate transnational crimes. So for instance, I'm talking about money laundering, or it could even be terrorism financing, and there are probably countless of other examples. But what I'm trying to say is that if we cannot investigate someone and prosecute someone for the serious international crimes, we still want to disrupt that person's criminal activity. And one of the ways of doing that is to make sure that we're not condoning the commission of other acts. Could be money laundering, could be terrorism financing, could be anything else. So in a way, it's also our role to make sure that potential perpetrators who cannot be prosecuted for international crimes are also investigated for alternative crimes, because that could be the last measure we have to basically put them behind bars and disrupt their participation in criminal activities.
And what are some of the practical ways in which we could do this, or states can begin to think about this?
I think it's really to take a holistic approach into the ways crimes are committed, but not just directly committed by people, but think about support that are being given to these various perpetrators. And here, for instance, if we look at the various armed conflicts around the world, we can see that the perpetrators, the leaders of the different armed groups, they need a lot of resources. They need vehicles, they need soldiers, they need to feed the soldiers, so they need a lot of money. I mean, where are they getting the money from? Where are they getting the vehicles from? Is it within their own jurisdiction? Is it within only one country? Or is the money coming from another state? Are there people aiding and abetting to the commission of international crimes by various other means? If these people are not in a particular region, they should be investigated and prosecuted in the countries where they're residing. So, and all this can help to end impunity. And as I said, and as I keep saying, is really the aim is to disrupt the criminal activity. So, so this is how alternative prosecutions can help in that regard.
Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you for your time, and
This
thank
has
you for
been